Welcome back. Ever since their meeting in June this year in Singapore, North Korea and the United States have been trying to assure each other of their commitments made at the historic meeting of their leaders. Now, in fact, the US President Donald Trump reportedly received a letter from North Korea's Kim Jong-un last week asking for a second meeting, and the White House is already looking at scheduling one.
Yeah, the president has received the letter from Kim Jong-un. It was a very warm, very positive letter. We won't release the full letter unless the North Korean leader agrees that we should. The primary purpose of the letter was to request and look to schedule another meeting with the president, which we are open to and are already in the process of coordinating that. The recent parade in North Korea, for once, was not about their nuclear arsenal. The president has achieved tremendous success with his policies so far, and this letter was further evidence of progress in that relationship. A number of things that have taken place. The remains have come back. The hostages have returned. There's been no testing of missiles or nuclear material, and of course the historic summit between the two leaders. And this letter is just further indication of the progress that we hope to continue to make.
Mr. Kim earlier in the week assured the United States he was committed to denuclearizing and would need more time to do so. So talks are still going on between the two countries, but they're not the only ones talking.
The meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and the US President Donald Trump rode on a lot of expectation that the United States President will be able to draw specifics on denuclearization from the North's leader, but both appeared to be on different pages as to what that meant. However, representatives on both sides say there have been discussions on North Korea's nuclear programs since then. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has jumped on the conversation, saying Trump and Jong-un need to take bold decisions to achieve denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. He is scheduled to hold the third summit with his North Korean counterpart in Pyongyang this week, and his government has pushed for a three-way summit with the US President present, with the aim of agreeing to a joint declaration to end the 1950-1953 Korean War. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Steve Biegun, has met with South Korea's Unification Minister, Cho Myung-gun, to discuss North Korean issues. He said he wanted to hear what plans South Korea had in its relations with the North.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you some of the exciting plans that you and the ministry have to try to breathe life into inter-Korean cooperation. We have a lot of work ahead of us to get to the point where we can realize those plans, but I think we very much share your resolve that we need to find a pathway to a future here on the Korean Peninsula that allows the inter-Korean relations to deepen as much as possible. So I look forward to working with you.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un appears oblivious to the anxiety expressed in the United States and South Korea, choosing instead to focus on their relations as well. On Tuesday, he treated the Chinese envoy and parliament chief and members of his delegation to a banquet. He told them that Pyongyang was focused on economic development and hopes to learn from China's experience in this regard. The next day, the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, speaking in Russia, said he wanted to meet the North Korean leader, but that there had been no discussions as yet to arrange any such summit. He said it had been bold of US President Donald Trump to hold a summit with Kim, and that he had high hopes of an upcoming inter-Korean summit in Pyongyang. The icing on the cake was when Russian President Vladimir Putin said North Korea was taking a lot of steps towards denuclearizing the Korean peninsula, but that Washington was not responding and was making endless demands for full disarmament instead. He also said relations between the two was vital for peace on the Korean peninsula. But the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accused Russia of actively working to undermine international sanctions on North Korea. During a press briefing at the State Department, he said enforcement of UN sanctions were essential to achieving the denuclearization of North Korea.
Russia has actively attempted to undermine the UN Security Council resolutions, the work of the 1718 Committee, the committee at the UN that evaluates compliance with sanctions, by attempting to change the language there. I hope that the 1718 Committee will do what it has historically done, remain independent and report on the facts as it know it, and not allow a single country, in this case Russia, to draft language and have it inserted. I hope they will publish the original document that they intended to publish, which shows it shows clear activities related to sanctions and sanctions violations.
And while the United States and North Korea struggle to find common ground for relations, North Korea's relations with neighboring South Korea continues to take several steps forward.
And here are other discussions in diplomatic circles. The UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths is in the Yemeni capital Sana'a, meeting with officials of the Houthi government after scheduled talks in Geneva collapsed earlier this month. His visit is the latest stop in another tour aiming to convince the Houthis to travel to Geneva for consultations that will lead to a peace agreement. Houthi-controlled local media says the United Nations struck an agreement to evacuate wounded Houthi soldiers by using Sana'a airport in a sign that diplomacy has started to pay off. The Houthis did not show up in Geneva for talks earlier this month after they said their plane should be provided by a neutral party and should not be inspected by the Saudi-led coalition. They also asked to evacuate some of their wounded to Amari or Europe. Austria and Germany agree that everything possible must be done to avoid Britain leaving the European Union without a trade deal. The comment was made by Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz before a meeting with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Kurz and Merkel said they were meeting to discuss a range of issues, including Britain's planned departure from the bloc in 2019, immigration and efforts to bolster EU border security ahead of an informal summit of EU leaders in Salzburg next week. Austria currently hosts the rotating EU presidency. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Theresa May has called on former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson's suicide bomb vest description of her Brexit negotiations completely inappropriate and called on Brits to focus on the delivery of Brexit instead of her leadership. Last week, Mr. Johnson had likened May's Brexit plan to wrapping a suicide bomb vest around the British Constitution and handing over the trigger to the European Union's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. Asked if she was still intending to honour a promise of stepping aside if the party no longer wanted her in charge, May said she was getting a little irritated by discussions focusing on her position instead of negotiating a successful Brexit.
I said what I said to my party. Throughout my time in public service, it has been about service. As a councillor, as an MP, as a Home Secretary, and now as Prime Minister. But actually, this is where I get a little bit irritated. This debate is not about my future. This debate is about the future of the people of the UK and the future of the United Kingdom.
Leaders of Ethiopia and Eritrea signed a historic peace treaty in Jeddah, marking the end of a 20-year war between the two African nations. Saudi Arabia's King Salman, accompanied by his Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, hosted the signing ceremony between Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki and Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The war that broke out in 1998 over the border and other issues killed an estimated 80,000 people before fighting ended in 2000 in a contested peace deal. Since signing an agreement in Asmara on July 9th to restore ties, Eritrea and Ethiopia have moved swiftly to sweep away 2 decades of hostility since conflict erupted between the two neighbors in the Horn of Africa. That's our time in the program this week. I'd like to hear your comments. You can send them to @ChannelsTV, @Amarachi_Ubani, and @Diplomatic Chan. I'll see you next time.